Good afternoon and welcome to ICE Webinars, a cool place for hot topics. Today we are joined by Josh Laberee, owner and administrator at Advanced Imaging. Josh has 16 years managerial and administrative leadership experience in the imaging and radiology field. Just a quick reminder to save the date for our 10th anniversary ICE 2024, which will be held at the Hyatt Regency in Irvine, California from February the 18th to the 20th. The Imaging Conference and Expo is the only conference dedicated to imaging directors, radiology administrators, and imaging engineers. ICE offers valuable CE credits from the ASRT and ACI and is a unique community of key decision makers and influential imaging professionals. So for more details, please visit attendice.com. Today's webinar is eligible for one ARRT Category A CE certificate by the HRA. You can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 CE credit, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. We're up today's presentation with a live Q&A, so please submit any questions anytime using the questions feature on the webinar dashboard. Okay, let's kick off today's webinar by giving away one of our ICE gym bags to the attendee that can tell me the answer to the following trivia question. July is National Blueberry Month. Which state is the biggest producer of blueberries? Answer now using the questions feature on your dashboard, and I'll reveal the answer at the end of the webinar. As I mentioned earlier, Josh Laberee is our presenter today, and he will be discussing, is this a dream or a nightmare? Millennials in the healthcare workplace. Josh, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. For those of you that don't met me or have never met me at an ICE conference, my name is Josh Laberee. I am the owner administrator of Advanced Imaging in Orange City, Florida. We're in Central Florida between Daytona and Orlando. I gave a very similar talk at the ICE conference last year, but I still feel it's still a very pertinent topic, as I'm sure many of you are having the same difficulty we are facing here in Central Florida. Completely difficult when it comes to hiring. Number one, hiring the right person. And number two, being able to find them at a price point we can afford in our budget. And number three, most importantly, employee retention. In my experience and expertise, I think one of those most difficult things to do is understanding the different generations in the workplace. And that biggest growing gap in those generations is we continue to see an influx based on their age coming into the workplace, being millennials. And again, as Linda reminded everybody, I hope to see everyone at the ICE conference on the West Coast next year in California. Make sure you mark your calendars. That is going to be February 18th through the 20th in beautiful Irvine at the Hyatt Regency. So we wanted to start off with a little bit of a survey poll, and I'm interested to see how many of you guys actually know. Do you know what percentage of your workforce or your staff is in that millennial generation between the ages of 26 and 41. So Linda will put a survey out there, and little interactive survey to kind of see the results and see if anybody does truly know the percentage of millennials in their workforce as that continues to grow each and every day.
Okay, Josh, I'm going to close out the poll. Let's have a look. And then I will share. So you have got 36% up to 25%, 55% was the 25 to 40%, and 9% over 40%.
Excellent. So again, I'm not a self-touting person, but kind of a little bit on my background and experience. It started in orthopedics. I worked for a multi-specialty orthopedic clinic in North Florida for 9 years. We did obviously orthopedics. We had outpatient ASCs as well as in-house imaging and radiology for MRI, CT, and X-ray. So that turned into me starting my own consulting firm in 2011. 13 years later, fast forward, I have 9 employees under me that we are continuing to do consulting throughout the Southeast, as well as having a brick and mortar imaging center here in Central Florida. And I've expanded that to doing franchise models for outpatient imaging throughout the state of Florida and Georgia. And it's been quite the invigorating experience and quite the challenge, but I love what I do. This is a picture of home base for me. We also have an attached urgent care that we're very proud of having. And it's served a very underserved community. We've been here for 11 years and continue to grow, but we scan and see patients 7 days a week. And we're proud to service over 25,000 patients a year coming through our door. So the reasons why we're here, my goals today, kind of the 4 key points. I want everyone to be able to understand what motivates and drives America's largest healthcare workforce, that being the millennial generation. Also want to be able to address misconceptions and stereotypes that are out there about those lovely millennials. And then also develop strategies to hire and retain the millennial generation. They are very unlike prior generations in the workforce and motivated by many different factors, not just necessarily money. And most importantly, not going to try to have a bunch of surveys and statistics and keep this boring. I'm here to keep it light. I'm here to keep it fun. If at any point anybody has a question, feedback, or anything, I encourage you, please, let's keep it interactive. I'd love to have an open discussion, hear some individual stories about hirings or anything interesting as we go through this. Please don't be afraid to share and raise your hand. Linda will chime you in and love to make it an open discussion. So just a breakdown of who we have in the workforce. We have the baby boomers from 1946 to 1964, Generation X from 1965 to 1980. You've got your millennials, which we're going to focus on, which are majority percentage of the workforce from 81 to 96. And then those youngins coming up, the Generation Zs that are 97 to 2012, that continue to influence and infiltrate the workforce. This is a little statistical graph from 2020 showing the percentage of workforce in millions by population. As you can see, this was the first year where the millennials became the largest demographic in the US workforce across in 2020, and that continues to grow. They will be over 100 million by the end of this year, estimated. Again, who are the millennials? Born from 1981 to 1996, going to be age 25 to 41. The biggest thing that hammer home, and the biggest thing I always remember to ask myself, they're always the generation that wants to ask why. This is also commonly referred to, and a correct stereotype, as the participation trophy generation. And I like this little Dos Equis meme here that, dear millennials, welcome to life. That participation trophy you wouldn't get as a kid, it doesn't work here. And so many of us know that in healthcare. But again, the biggest thing for them is they are stereotyped as the participation trophy generation. Just wanted to put in this little bit of humor, the stereotype disclaimer. While the purpose of this presentation is meant to be informative and educational, it may not be true for all millennials. If you're sensitive to groups of people being thrown into tiny stereotypical boxes, then this presentation may not be of particular benefit to you. Absolutely a total joke, but also want to make sure that we get you guys some good information that hopefully you can take back and get into those C-suite meetings and have a discussion about how we can improve HR and how we can improve hiring for this particular generation. And no, as another disclaimer, no millennials were harmed or injured during the research and making of this this presentation. Stereotypes. Does anybody want to share any particular stereotypes that they have about this generation? And do you feel that any stereotypes about this millennial generation are true? Does anybody have any? Give me some good stories. Give me some juice. Anybody? Nobody?
Actually, we just have one come in. We find them to be super entitled, and that is that comes up several times. So
I agree, and that is one of the biggest things that we are going to address here. And I do agree that if that is a stereotype, I personally feel that is true amongst the
Yeah,
millennial
and
generation.
yeah, also that's just come up is not wanting to work nights, weekends, or holidays, and can't let go of their phones.
Agreed, and agreed. We will address one of those. The phone situation I don't really have in here. I think that's a continued HR issue that we all face. But I do have the night and weekend and some of the recommendations for how to handle differential shifts and things like that later in the presentation. So I hope we have an opportunity to look at that.
Yeah, just one more, Josh. You micromanage me. That's the last one to come in.
That is very true. I agree. And I think that sums it up in a picture. If that's one thing that's true. Where's my promotion? Got to put in the work in order to get up the ladder. So misconception number one, some of the things that I want to try to put to bed is the misconception is that millennials don't work hard. It's proven through productivity models and surveys and research that millennials are one of the hardest working generations. They just work differently. So how do we motivate them, and how do we put them into a model and in a role where productivity is being harnessed? It's something that we will look at. Millennials don't view work in a hierarchical structure. They're very independent thinkers. And I think the hardest part for us in the healthcare field, it makes us one of the most difficult employers to fulfill some of their structure or lack thereof, and the needs for setting goals, times, project deadlines, and being able to make their productivity quantifiable. And I think the biggest thing too, in my experience and in learning, is the number of hours does not mean hard work. It's how fast you solve a problem. So a lot of the frustration for the millennials is if they're able to get something done, and it's a 2-hour expected timeline, and they're able to accomplish it in 30 minutes. How is it fair for them that they have to wait for someone in another generation to get their work done? And down here, I can send everybody a copy of this presentation, but back here you'll see that I have links to a lot of great articles where a lot of this research by myself was done, where you can get some really cool tools and some generators to where you can kind of run some of your own surveys and give you guys some tools and some knowledge that you're able to take back and survey your own people. My email will be on the presentation at the end of this, and I'm happy to share that with everyone. So this is one of the other difficult things with us being in the healthcare field. This is the brands and typical large companies that the millennials, when surveyed, most want to work for. And as you can see here, all the way down at number 9, the only healthcare related company that makes the top 10 is Johnson & Johnson. So what can we learn from these other tech companies, these other large companies that are able to harness, retain, and get productivity from the millennial generation? What are they doing differently that we are not? And what can we learn from them? And what can we incorporate into our healthcare facilities and into our specialty that can allow for us to retain them and allow productivity to increase for the millennial generation? So how do we get this generation to do what we want in the healthcare field? One of the biggest things that I've implemented when I consult and with my own practices, does anyone give an attendance or tenure bonus? I know that that's something that sounds at face value is a little bit ridiculous and over the top, but I can tell you, since I have started offering an attendance bonus in 3 of my locations that I consult for and franchise, since we've done an attendance bonus, we pay $100 for perfect attendance monthly, and that has been able to save through those 3 locations over a 3.5-year period. Essentially, since coming out of COVID, I've been able to trim staffing costs by about 17% globally, and the amount of money spent on that attendance bonus versus rehiring or adding additional employees has created a significant savings across the board. And if anybody's more interested in hearing about that, I'm happy to share and happy to talk to you guys directly. Feel free to shoot me an email. Going back to the issue that we faced before and the question that was presented too, is flex time possible in the world of imaging? With the differential shifts that we need, nights, weekends, 24/7 coverage at hospitals, how can we think outside the box and incentivize this millennial generation not only to want to work, but want to work the hours that we need them to? And in my personal opinion, I don't think it's just throwing money at, giving time and a half or double on night and weekend shifts. Again, easier said than done, but I do feel that that's one of the hot button items and hot topics that needs to be addressed. And I'd love to hear feedback if anybody has any ideas or wants to raise their hand there. I always love to have open discussion on that point because I think any ideas that anyone has are beneficial across the board, how they're handling that. If anybody has any other feedback too, in this realm, I'm more than happy and I'd love to hear.
No takers at the moment, Josh.
No takers, that's okay. We'll roll through, not a problem.
Oh no, hang on, one moment. 12-hour shifts.
That's the question, 12-hour shifts?
Yeah.
And then if this is for a 24-hour facility, my biggest recommendation or question would be, have you considered doing, instead of doing 12s, doing 3 8s as an alternative option for people that would rather work an 8-hour shift versus a 12, or even doing a 10-hour shift 4 days a week to fulfill the 40 and prevent the overtime? So moving on to misconception number 2, millennials don't save money, they're spenders, not savers. A recent survey conducted in May of 2021, conducted by BOA, Bank of America, found that 73% of millennials are actively saving money, and more than half of those, 59%, have excess of $15,000 or more in savings. Perhaps even more impressive, the survey also found that nearly 1 in 4, 24%, has 6 figures in savings. So definitely there. I mean, that was a survey of over 20,000 millennials done 2 years ago. That was very surprising. And the reason I wanted to include this is I think that's a misconception that they're not savers, and they're not asking for more money just because they want to spend more money, but they're thinking about the future, which is a positive thing. Take it for what you want, but it is statistically true based on the survey. On the whole, the survey found that Americans' average personal savings have grown 10% a year over a year, from 65.9 in 2020 up to 73,100 in 2021. And then retirement savings among the generation have jumped 13% from 87.5 to 98.8. And then this is just a breakdown from howmuch.net. Again, I'm happy to send out this presentation. But looking at it individually broken down, based on that statistic that I said, you can see that there's a significant amount of that population, over 20% for male and over at 12% for female, that have over $20,000. But based on the American average and based on where the average household savings is, they are far superior in every one of these categories. So it's just something to notate as you do go through the hiring process, not just the hourly wage offered, but platforms that are available, for investments and saving are highly looked at by potential millennial candidates that you're looking to retain and hire. Misconception number 3, millennials job hop. Young people have always changed jobs more than older people, but it's definitely the case that the rate of mobility has fallen for the millennial generation. Uncertain times might be driving a desire among millennials for greater stability. I think that is absolutely even more true since COVID. And I don't know if anybody has any feedback about whether they've seen increased retention since COVID amongst the millennial generation, but we have seen job hopping numbers go down. So I don't know if that's a direct reflection of us as employers offering, better benefits, better pay, and more of what they want. But they're tending to stay a little bit longer, and tenure is increasing. 7 out of 10 millennials living in mature economies, according to a 2017 survey, would prefer to be in full-time employment rather than freelance work. And the reasons most often given for this preference are job security and a fixed income. So the PRN, part-time 1099 model, I don't know, again, and this is my personal experience, but throwing a few extra dollars at it for a 1099 part-time employee are less attractive than being able to offer a full-time position with benefits. So it's something to think about, and I think it is a stereotype that is not necessarily true for this generation. So going back again for the job hopping, sorry, my screen is big. If this looks diluted or grainy, I apologize. It seems that millennials change jobs less frequently than other generations, with many saying they don't predict countless job changes in their lives. I do think that's something that they are stereotyping for that's not as true as we think. Based on the survey, it is from 2018, but it was the most relevant one that I could find. 59% of millennials who've been in their current job for more than 3 years is over half. That was extremely surprising to me, and a stereotype for me as a whole that was incorrect in my mind. And then also, only 6% of millennials believe they will have more than 10 jobs in their lifetime. So it's not that they don't want to have tenure, it's they want to have tenure somewhere that they are appreciated and have a platform where they feel that their work is noticed, not just financially. And we'll address those pieces coming up and as to why and some solutions for it. It's another one of my favorites. Just kind of summing it up, that the old man bun is the millennial mullet. So let's talk about some actual true stereotypes that are out there. Number one, so many people think, don't give millennials constructive feedback. Based on research and surveys, that is absolutely true. If you want to ask them to be innovative and creative, don't tell them how to do a task. They want to be assigned with the project as a whole or the goal oriented mind structure to be focused on, this is what I need it done, this is what I need it done by, and they absolutely meet goals and get their job done in a timely fashion based on that. So if I could word that in one sentence, this is something that we always try to use this term. Instead of feedback, offer perspective, insight, and being able to allow them, again, to be innovative and creative. Focus on giving them perspective, set goals that are measurable, and let them do their job. And this is another saying and phrase that I use and we try to all the time. Start with asking this question: I have a perspective I would like to share. Would you be willing to hear it? Giving someone a choice in the matter about whether to hear what you have to say eliminates the chance of catching them off guard, reducing their defensiveness and resistance. Again, I know it can sound like hand holding sometimes, but in the long term and in the long play, I think it is a better approach based on what this generation, how they think and what their mindset is going into a project. And another good one, a millennial who accepts constructive criticism. Now, there's something I don't see very often, and it's very, very true. But at the same standpoint, it's a fine line between the constructive criticism and being able to set quantifiable goals at quantifiable timeframes. True stereotype number 2, Generation Y. Are you sure you know as an employer why you've asked them to do something? If you are, take a minute and explain the purpose up front. You will likely get that 5 minutes of productivity back later in the day. And this is one thing, again, I'll give you guys a copy of this speech and hammer it home, but this is something that I try to follow, with managerial leaders across my locations. It sounds like it takes a lot of time to do that piece, and a lot of people think it's micromanaging, but I do firmly believe that the return on investment to take the time to make sure you're understanding why is so important. Millennials don't ask this question of impatience. Again, the theme of it, they ask why. They genuinely want to help, but they want to feel that they're providing value, they're contributing to the team, and they're not just being told to do something. They want to understand why the means lead to an end. Asking why does not mean they're impatient. It's just the way they were raised and how they are. They want to know why, and they want to know that they're part of the bigger picture. But again, I think at the end of the day, the fine line is when we have these multiple generations within the workforce, especially in healthcare, and building a dynamic, we can't build individual job descriptions and goals and building a structure around a single generation. But does this affect productivity? And at the end of the day, how do you set yourself up for success for this generation without affecting productivity or without slowing yourself or your department down? That's the difficult question to answer. But I think at the end of the day, again, going back to the first point, you're going to get that 5 minutes of productivity back later in the day by taking the time to explain. And when they ask why, make sure you take the time to explain. And that's another funny one. What if millennials ask so many questions because their generation, why? True stereotype 3, and we hit on it at the beginning of the conversation. They are the participation trophy generation. Hate it or love it, globally across the board, that tends to be their tendency and the way that they grew up. Whether it's playing in organized sports or as children, they're taught everybody is a winner, nobody can be a loser. Well, in the real world and in the workplace, we know that that's not necessarily going to be true. But some things we can do to focus on and try to combat that. Constant positive feedback. It's definitely required and so important to maximize productivity. Again, it's a fine balance of taking that time versus hand-holding and coddling, but it's something that they need. And again, not their fault. It's how the older generations raised them. Facts are facts. I don't know that if everybody agrees with that, and we can't sit here and I can't, give a conversation and speech and say, oh, it's great, just take the time to answer their why questions and everything will be great. But I mean, does anybody have any story or feedback to where they're giving a different approach or they're approaching this younger generation differently than older generations in the workplace? Does anybody have any stories of how they're handling the millennial generation differently, or any stories that would be helpful to talk about productivity to maximize what millennials are doing in the workplace? I'd love to hear from anyone if they have any stories.
Nothing so far, Josh.
No worries. Again, take the time to tell them why task is important. They're extremely competitive. That's the other thing too, I didn't kind of touch on that I want to too. Any type of competition you can create through your departments, not just including the millennial generation. I think you can also harness them and their need to be competitive to help productivity across the other generations of the workforce. It can come across as a little abrasive at first, but again, if there's financial incentives tied to it, or it's a team goal, I think by default people find a way to put their feelings and generational differences aside and work together as a team towards a common goal. If everybody is incentivized in a way that allows everybody to get to a common goal together, because at the end of the day, no matter what generation we are, we want to feel like our work is worth and going towards something, and we all want to win and feel accomplished and accomplish goals that are set up by our organization or our employer.
Okay, Josh, we've got a couple of comments come in here.
Absolutely.
One says required weekly monitoring of attendance and productivity, and the second one is assigned tasks by generation because each generation is good at different things.
I agree with that. Is that something that this individual is doing? Do we know?
No response just yet.
Yeah, I think that's great feedback.
Yes.
And I'd
Yes,
love to.
she just responded and said yes.
Excellent. How is that being broken down? Or I mean, without getting into too much detail, how are they doing it individually? Is it work is being partitioned by focusing on the strengths of the different generations?
Yes.
That's amazing. I would love to hear more on that. That's incredible.
The lady concerned said she will email you.
That would be awesome. I would love to hear that. I've never seen that done, and I would be very excited to talk to you about how that's being done. That's incredible. And again, just another pick at millennials, but another funny point. So again, as we see, and these statistics continue to be updated regularly, and especially since post-COVID, we saw a lot of the elder generations in the workforce, especially in healthcare, retiring or leaving the workforce at record numbers during and post-COVID. Millennials were the largest generation in the workforce in the United States in 2018, with an estimated population of 72.1 million. And again, that is estimated by the end of 2023 to be somewhere right around 100 million. So they continue to grow and will be continuing to grow as the most dominant generation in the workforce for time to come. They've surpassed the boomers recently, as we know, and they'll continue to be a major part of the workplace. And again, we're talking about 100 million by the end of this year, and then over 4/5, 80% of the total workforce in 7 years in 2030 is going to be the millennial generation. So again, if we think it's hard now, it's going to continue to get harder. And if there's one thing we take away from today, let's figure out ways to be, instead of being reactionary, being proactive and being able to anticipate this workforce change that's coming. And what can we do to number one, attract them, and number two, retain them. But this is another great website down here. Happy to share the speech again with anybody that wants to look at it. But a wealth of knowledge and some great surveys and some great points that you can take back to your departments and try to implement. In 2010, the millennial generation accounted for 19% of the healthcare workforce. In 2020, in one decade, it went from 19% to 50%. And then in the next decade, which we're in that increase now, we're going to be at 70% in the healthcare workforce. So the interesting part is, if you look at these numbers, healthcare specifically versus the workforce as a whole, and going back to the tried and true surveys that we talked about earlier, with the Googles and the Amazons of the world, we're losing the younger generation already to other positions and other jobs and other industries, where we're going to continue to have an issue with underemployment in the healthcare field. And it's something that continues statistically, if you look at it, post-COVID, to continue to be a very large and concerning issue of not only how do we retain the people we have, but how do we recruit new talent into the healthcare field to prevent them from going elsewhere. I mean, I personally, down here in Central Florida, in the South, and in Florida, it has become almost near impossible for us to retain and hire full-time MRI techs. I don't know if anybody has that same situation, but it is unbelievable, the shortage that we have from an MRI tech perspective here in the state of Florida. So it's a good graph, but millennials became the largest generation of the labor force. They took over as we saw the boomers retiring. They officially took over the top spot in 2016. And as we've talked about, they will continue to grow into the workforce. And I'm not even addressing, we're talking about Gen Z today too, where we continue to hire and see kids that are, born after 2000 entering the workforce in professional positions and invading healthcare. So it's a lot of things to think about and a lot of things for us to, I think, have group discussions to make sure that we have a game plan to fix this. So if you take a look at your staffing, and if you take a look at how you're departmentally stacking up, does anybody have a great story about a team leader or anybody that's been promoted into administrative or managerial position that is a millennial, that is outstanding, and that is doing a good job of managing the multi-generational issues within a department? Love to hear if anybody has any stories about what makes them great, characteristics, work ethic. Would love to hear, and I think it's a great time to share and help the rest of us understand why we're here and what we can do better, as employers, to make sure not only that we're putting them in a position that they're happy with, but also giving them an opportunity to lead, because by default, they're going to need to at a record pace in the next 7 years. And then on the heels of that, I'm sure this one's a little bit easier. Naming a not so great millennial you've hired or worked with. What were their bad qualities? And then does anybody have any amazing hiring or firing stories of millennials? The one thing too that I didn't put as a stereotype, but is statistically true, they have a strong tendency not to give a professional notice in a professional position, or have a tendency when they are not happy to just decide to leave. And sometimes if those quality control measures aren't there to be getting that feedback and not answering that question why, they tend not to give feedback and tend just to move on to the next position. Any takers, Linda?
Not at the moment, Josh.
No
Sorry.
worries. No. This is a different, it's tough to have all of us remote instead of in a conference room being able to bounce ideas off each other. So trying to give some things, and even if you guys don't and we don't interact now, I highly suggest a lot of these questions, or maybe make this a great topic for your managerial department head meetings, and really start to have these discussions to understand how your staff stacks up. So the definition here, the old boomer and millennial divide that we have in offices. A boomer is anyone older than you that you don't like. And to the boomers, it's anyone younger than you that you don't like. We actually have printed this and put this in a lot of break rooms and handed it out in some employee meetings, just as a joke to kind of liven the situation and get conversations started. Because at the end of the day, ironically, both of these subsets who make up a majority of the workforce tend to be both goal-oriented and goal-driven. It's just they have a tendency to get there in a very different form and fashion. So going back and transitioning into the baby boomer generations, what about again, we touched on it a little bit before. There's a record number of the baby boomer generation leaving to retire. It's clearing out a lot of the professional level positions. And one of the stereotypes too that I didn't put in here that tends to be true based on data and research, the C-suite and the executive level positions are being cleared out with this baby boomer generation. And there wasn't really a next of kin or someone in line that was from that younger generation that tended to be in a mentored position to where they put a qualified person that's had some time to learn under that boomer generation to take over that very pivotal position in the C-suite. So definitely something to look at. And this is continued research too. And this is a great link if you guys want to look at it. But this is an updated article that they continue to post numbers on quarterly. But over 10,000 retirees nationwide in the workplace are leaving every day. And those numbers continue to happen at a record pace post-COVID. And I think it's, COVID being one of the scapegoats for causing people to be reflective and look at things a little bit differently. But we need a record number of techs. We need a record number of the younger generation entering into the healthcare field to fill this void. What do we do? And I think we're past the point of having it be something we need to think about. I think it needs to be something that is a priority one, line item on all of our HR plans in the immediacy. So how do we encourage our younger generation to get into imaging? How do we encourage them to get into healthcare? Whether that's from a high school graduate that's immediately going into a subspecialty program and skipping the college track. I'm not saying that's an answer, but I think it's definitely maybe one of the questions that needs to be left open for discussion for what do we need to do in order to fill these gaps that we have. I'm happy to hear any feedback at this point too that anyone would have for this particular situation.
We have one, Josh, and the comment is schools are not taking enough students.
I agree. And I think too, on the heels of that, one thing that I would add to that comment and feedback is that I don't think these schools are doing a good job of, number one, growing, like you said with the question, but I think number two, letting and educating kids as they're getting towards the end of high school that there are scholarships, there's grants, there's programs that are out there. I mean, there's hospitals I know of here in the Central Florida area that literally have built-in schooling where kids can start and their tuition is forgiven when they graduate and work for that employer. But I think we need to continue to come up with creative solutions to be able to educate these kids before they decide to go, on the quote unquote conventional route, or not look at least giving them an opportunity to objectively look at entering the healthcare field and in a professional position being an option with great pay, great benefits, and it's just not getting put on their plate as an idea. And how do we change that? I don't have the immediate answer. I wish that I did, but I think for us at the executive level across the board, definitely something we need to discuss together and look at. And I think here's another one that sums it up. There's my generation, today the new generation. Whiners, complainers. Another slide. I know there's a lot of information here, but I think if you look at this across the board, I think that this is something that is really, really good across the board in terms of statistics that really hit home. And I highly recommend taking some of these as, fuel to the fire that you can take back to the management and your people in the managerial level in your meetings. Less than 10% in both of these groups, that being the baby boomers and the millennials, say that less than 10% say they choose the office as their preferred place to get important work done. How do we combat that? Only 9% in both demographics said they wouldn't mind returning to the office after having telecommuted. Roughly 65% of both groups have telecommunicated their job before. A quarter of both those groups identify as freelancers. Roughly 10% in both groups say they suffer from chronic illness or health issues. How are we addressing that? 41% in both demographics said they didn't think they should have to exchange anything, such as vacation time or salary, for the option to telecommute. But again, looking at how do we battle the flexibility of being able to work from home when in the healthcare field it's not an option. And again, we can't just continue to throw money at it as reimbursement continues to go down across the board for all of us. Another comparison, war of the words, millennials versus baby boomers. Words often most used to describe the millennial and baby boomer generations. So for millennials, the hot words are tech savvy, materialistic, selfish, lazy, and arrogant. And baby boomers, no surprise here, would tend to be the opposite a little bit. Respectful, work-centric, community-oriented, well-educated, and ethical. So again, it's a very different description based on your different generations. So even though that tended to be contrasting there with the words describing them, if you look at millennials and the older generations in the workforce, they have many of the same career goals. And this is one of the most important things that stood out to me was the most important thing when surveyed was common amongst millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers. The number one response was making a positive impact on my organization, help solving a social and environmental challenge, work with a diverse group of people, work for an organization among the best in my industry. All these are commonalities amongst the generations. So how do we get rid of the generational gaps where they do have differences and focus on the ability for us to work towards these common goals and these common core values? So let's unite these people and let's work towards a common goal by finding what they're invested in as individuals and what motivates them. But this is an interesting another survey to be able to take back to say, hey, show your people and find out that it's true and try to find some common ground amongst them. Baby boomers, biggest thing is too, don't make the millennials. They still, even though we talk negatively about how fast they're exiting, they currently are still a large portion of the workforce. They need to be managed and incentivized differently, which we already touched on. And for the boomers, how do we get you to understand the millennials? Please, someone help. It has to be something that, as we need to understand the millennials, we also have to educate, other generations that they need to be answered the question why, and then they need to be handled differently. It's definitely, I think, one of the biggest departmental challenges because you tend to have your boomers in the managerial and C-suite positions, and you have your millennials that want to get on board and get behind them, but got to be able to find common ground. Anybody have any baby boomers out there that wants to debunk any stereotypes, or please come at me and say, hey, this isn't true about us. I'm not trying to put everybody into boxes. Again, this doesn't apply to everyone, but just trying to work off some generalities that tend to be true for the generation as a whole. So I think at the end of the day, too, looking at the commonalities between the boomers and the millennials, how does your organization recognize hard work? How do we ensure that we're recognizing the hard work? And again, I don't think it's just a monetary thing. I think it's departmentally and at every level of your organization, no matter how big or small, showing people that they're appreciated, that you're willing to put in the time, whether that's leading by example, hosting, whether it's a little happy hour or buying the office lunch, or what are the little things we can do to show our appreciation to our people. Because I think while we all scramble to continue to hire and add good people to the workforce, do we lose track or take advantage or take for granted that we have great people on our staff that maybe are overworked and underappreciated? So it's something to definitely keep in mind and not overlook your current people and understand that you're recognizing them for putting in the hours and the hard work. And then I think the biggest thing too with it, is there more than one right way to get the job done? Again, boomers are time focused. You give them a task, you tell them how long it takes to get done. That's what they want to do. Millennials are task focused. Tell them what needs to be done, and typically without micromanaging. And after they've had their 5-minute conversation about why am I doing this, they tend to do it in an extremely accurate and efficient way. Retaining millennials is cheaper than replacing. Again, going back to the incentive bonus, whether it's an incentive bonus, attendance bonus, but these are facts and statistics to hammer that home. 91% of millennials expect to stay in a job less than 3 years. 54% of millennials either want to start their own business or have already started one. 78% of millennials would rather spend money on an event over buying something. And 45% of millennials will choose workplace flexibility over pay. And that's the biggest one that I would highlight and take home, y'all, is 45% would rather have flexibility over pay. So as we're trying to staff these 24-hour shifts, these 12-hour shifts, 24/7 coverage, how can we allow them to have flexibility? One of the biggest things I try to implement with departmental and managerial leads is I like to survey the staff that's filling that department and say, hey, you want flexibility? Bring me a solution. And I have a lot of my departments now making their own schedule ahead of time and then having the different levels of managerial hierarchy approved them, of course, but they can come to the table with some great ideas historically. Any good suggestions out there after all of this? Anybody to keep your millennials happy and employed?
No takers for that one, Josh.
No worries at all. So hiring millennials, it's always a work in progress. How do you approach hiring this generation differently? I hope we touched on that a little bit. Has COVID changed how you've had to hire? I think that there's changes that, again, COVID might have been the scapegoat for making those changes, but I think they're here to stay. And I think that we need to stop saying that, it's quote unquote, things are going to go back to normal. I don't think it'll ever be the way that it was. And we need to accept that. What do we need to do in the workplace and as employers to be dynamic and ensure that we're adapting to those needed changes? Has the hiring process become more difficult because of the influx of millennials? I personally think so. But again, I think it's looking at what we need to change and sometimes being able to anticipate changes we need to make instead of reacting to a situation where we're on a hiring shortage or we have a staffing shortage within our organization. Millennials are more likely than other generations to be impacted financially by COVID-19. Again, I'll let you guys take a look at this if anybody wants to send them a copy. But I think it's interesting if you look at the statistics that they tend to be impacted financially by COVID-19. Percentage of important factors when choosing employer. If you look at this, again, kind of the commonalities for millennials, and I did include Gen Z a little bit here because we are seeing an influx too as they grow older into the healthcare workplace. Financial benefits, positive workplace, flexibility, continuous learning, and well-being programs. I think the other interesting part here is the well-being programs and understanding that they're going to need the mental health aspect of things. So keeping them employed, tip one, positivity. Millennials' main motivation at work is not money. Again, let them ask why and have answers for them. Just don't tell them to do something. Let them know why they need to do it. They want to see company values. They don't want to be told about them. Biggest personal concerns is health, disease prevention, unemployment, climate change, education and skills, and then interestingly enough, corruption in business and politics. So there's a lot of factors that are going in, to the culture of your company that are factoring in into the tenure of these potential good employees. Keep them employed. Mental health, again, does your company and the benefits you offer any mental health benefits? If you don't, I highly recommend it. It's a significant increase in mental health concerns for the millennial generation. Is anybody offering those benefits for paid mental health benefits? And extra time off, something I recommend too. Give everybody an extra PTO on the day on their birthday. Do you offer bereavement pay? Does anybody offer PTO buyback? So incentivize them to keep them at work, Mental health issues. I mean, if you look statistically, all adults, 34% are worried about their mental health, but the percentage tends to be higher for the younger generations. So I definitely think it's something that we need to look at and we need to focus on. 3 in 10 millennials say they always or often feel lonely. All other things that we need to look at. We think that they're these social butterflies and they're here to do a lot of things, but maybe sometimes that we need to make sure that we look and address that, maybe we need to reach out and help them with outreach for mental health. Tip number 3 to keep them employed, flexibility. Again, in healthcare, flexibility does not mean working from home. How can we give this generation the flex time and schedule they desire while maintaining quality patient care? Again, I don't know the answer, but my biggest recommendation would be survey your staff and get ideas from them. It's amazing some of the things that they can bring to the table. Again, we touched on a little bit, letting my employees making their schedule as a team, bringing great ideas to the table. But again, across all generations, happy employees are better employees. Work-life balance, super important, as we can see. Interesting enough, to combat the working from home, though, the statistic that I take from this, 45% of millennials find working from home is difficult because it's harder to concentrate. So giving them a work environment where, again, they can socialize and being able to combine helping that mental health with being able to socialize and have good coworkers in a nice office environment, and allowing them a work environment that's productive that they can focus on. Tip number 4, let them make the decisions. Two-way feedback is important. How many of you guys allow your employees to do supervisor and C-level suite evaluations? How good is their manager, department manager, or how well is their administrator doing? I think open constructive criticism should go 2 ways and be a 2-way street, and I think that allows a lot of walls to be broken down by it. Bringing any of those executive C-suite people down from the quote-unquote watchtower. We have a colleague, I don't know if anybody knows Nicole, they do walkthroughs on the daily. Each day of the week, a different member of the C-suite goes down on the ground level and says good morning and gets to know and see, the decisions that they're making, how it's impacting people on the ground level. Use those people to harness their ideas to make them better across the board. So interestingly enough, retention, why it's important, the cost of replacing a millennial employee, it's $1,500 to $1,000 in expenses. So again, I know it seems elementary sometimes or ridiculous to want to offer an employment bonus or a retention bonus or an attendance bonus, but at the end of the day, overall, I think it solves a lot of issues and saves a lot of money. Again, looking at another piece, the interview process for good hiring. Who's recruiting your candidates? Is it multiple people or generations, or is it just your C-suite generation interviewing younger people? I think making sure that you have a diverse group of different generations being part of that process is important. In-person shadowing days, multiple interviews. And again, I know we all do background checks when we're professional positions, but first thing that I do, check social media, see what they're about. But retention is key. So I hope it wasn't too boring. I hope everybody's still awake. But what did we learn? I think at the end of the day, we all have to learn how to work together and make this work. Ask yourselves a couple questions, coming from this conversation and speech today. Will you change any of your hiring processes? What can we do better as a whole to increase retention and work together? Would any of your company policy changes or your employee handbook allow you to hire better? I think that's another good question to ask. But I appreciate everyone's time. I hope I didn't put you to sleep. But if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Okay, Josh, we've just got time for one before we wrap up. Is how can schools accommodate more students when clinical sites do not have the staffing to train them?
I agree. I mean, the counter question to that, and not to be dismissive of the question, is for these larger organizations and hospital groups. Have you ever considered bringing your own school or starting your own school in-house? I know we've seen a couple of the large healthcare providers here in Florida do it, and it's been, and it's done well. And I think the other thing is, if for the schools and the relationship that we have is we're all understaffed and then trying to take a student for continuing education, is there anything that they could offer in terms of potentially financial incentive, a grant, an employment bonus, all things that we need to look at. But I think that there is definitely a situation where we are understaffed as the healthcare facility to be able to take someone to shadow. And at the same standpoint, how can the schools add any more people if they don't have anywhere to place them? It's a difficult situation, and I mean, not to say we're not facing it here in Florida either, but I've seen a couple large hospital systems here in Florida and Georgia start their own schools in-house, and it's helped fill that gap.
Okay, just quickly leading on from that, you would still have the traditional schools needing clinical sites, so would there be a net gain?
Would there be a net gain from you mean from transitioning them from their program into needing shadowing, and a net gain by the employer potentially, or the site?
The attendee doesn't say that, so I'm presuming what you're saying is, oh no, hang on, if hospitals started their own school.
If hospitals started their own school and net gain. So a good example I can tell you here, a healthcare system, for example, they started doing their own MRI program, they got accredited. If that particular person goes through that schooling, there is no cost to them initially, but what they're signing on is for the length of their school, they are agreeing to employment, obviously paid, but they're agreeing to employment for that length of tenure for the essentially the cost of their schooling in exchange.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Josh. We've come to the end of our hour. So thank you once again for your time today and for a great and eye-opening presentation. As you can see, Josh's email address is on the screen, so please feel free to reach out to him. As promised, the answer to today's trivia question is Washington State, closely followed by Michigan. So congratulations to our winner. Just a quick reminder, you can attain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 ARRT Category A CE credit by the HRA, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Please visit icewebinars.live for more details of all our upcoming ICE webinars and complimentary registration. Thank you once again for your time today, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.